I'm Pat Doris. Welcome to The Story. This week, the family of Damon Coates marked a bittersweet anniversary. 20 years ago Monday, the former Clackamas County Sheriff's deputy was shot in the face by a 15-year-old who struggled with drugs and mental health. It's a reminder that the issues that we talk about a lot on this show have been with us for a long time. I know Damon from interviewing him many times before he was shot. He was the public information officer for the Sheriff's Department. A lot of people thought he'd die that first night, but he pulled through. And then a lot of others thought he would die several times since then, but he's always pulled through, and he's alive tonight, although unable to speak and confined to a wheelchair. We'll talk with his wife Tammy in a moment. But first, let's catch up on what happened to that 15-year-old shooter. His name is Nick Texera. After the shooting, the teen was found guilty except for insanity of attempted aggravated murder and assault 1. He was sentenced to 20 years of supervision by the Oregon Psychiatric Security Review Board and spent years in various settings getting help for his mental illness. Monday of this week, with credit for time served, his 20 years were up. It's the same day as the anniversary of the shooting. The Psychiatric Review Board released him from its jurisdiction. He can now go wherever he wants and do whatever he wants. His last known address was in Lynn County. Okay, so he's been able to move on. But the damage he did to the Coates family is far from over. There's no release from their pain. It's been 20 years now, and it appears the burden is harder than ever to endure.
It became a high-risk search warrant.
This is the Damon Coates I remember.
We're speculating that he may have actually been carrying the gun.
Confident and eloquent, he helped viewers understand the latest from the Clackamas County Sheriff's Office. Later, he switched to a different role and responded to calls for help, like the one that brought him to this house, January 9th, 2003.
It was a hot call when the dispatchers could hear yelling in the background.
Nick Texera was in some sort of a mental health and drug-fueled crisis that lasted several days. Eventually, he ended up at his mom's house and was out of control. When Damon Coates arrived, he did not think Texera was armed. As he went to pat him down just to make sure, the teen pulled out a gun and shot Damon in the face. Another officer shot Texera. After the shooting, Damon Coates suffered a stroke and was partly paralyzed. Tuesday, I went to the Coates home to talk with his wife Tammy and see how it's going all these years later.
I would say pretty good. Would you say pretty good? Yeah? We're making one day count, one day at a time. A little difficult. We had 3 of the 4 kids come over and spend it with us, and we got to watch some videos, and so that kind of was a good spot for me to be in, and probably you, to have the kids support us.
Yeah.
And but later, after everybody was gone and I was by myself, it was hard.
Yeah, because it's, gosh, one day at a time, but then you look back and you see it's been years and years and years.
Yeah, and then the footage of him before he was shot, because you have a lot of that, it was just surreal. Like, wow, I had forgotten kind of how that was.
The family shared this picture of Damon and some of the kids gathered to watch old video clips on the 20th anniversary. They also shared this picture of Damon taken sometime before the shooting. He was a big, strong guy. In the years after the shooting, Damon forced himself to learn to talk and eat again. He also threw himself into rehab, learning to walk and move at least a bit. He attended car shows and went on adventures with friends. He was able to walk down the aisle at both sons' weddings. He's been confined to a wheelchair for the other 2 children's weddings, but he is still here. Tammy and Damon married 39 years ago. She's still with him now.
Yeah, you're pretty good at keeping upbeat, and he's always wanting to get out of bed, you know, and then wanting to get back in bed, but still.
I'm with you on that, brother.
Yeah, exactly. You know you're old when that's all you dream about and fantasize, getting into bed.
The laughter covers the pain. In 2011, Damon had seizures, and doctors said he'd be lucky to live a year. Then in 2016, a spinal cord issue caused by the bullet still in his body threatened to take his life. He survived that one, too. And earlier this year, he was throwing up and choking. It got so bad, he was put on hospice care. Tammy's not sure what the future holds now.
So even the past week, he's kind of flipped it around. So we just kind of go with the flow. I just pray that things happen organically and that I won't have to choose different things. Because when you work with hospice, you realize different choices. The power that I have that I'd rather not have is difficult to grasp. So, because if you go by the person, it's up and down and changing all the time.
Sure.
So we're just taking one day at a time, and glad that you're feeling healthy. You're not really in any pain, right? I mean, just aches and pains. I am too. But we stopped therapy and we did things a little bit differently, but we're not sure what we're going to do next.
The family moved a couple of years ago to a new location in Oregon City. This property has a small barn that's now converted into Damon's home. A medical aid helps him with critical things like eating. His wife Tammy and the kids help out too. She stays in a small house nearby. She tries to stay positive, but the grueling weight of the reality of their life gets more difficult to carry as the years go by.
I would say the last 3 years have been the most difficult for me. I'm not sure why. Maybe it's just my age or the length of time. But the loneliness set in pretty heavy. And the agitation on his end. And of course, because you're frustrated, you can't talk, you can't get your point across, you can't get to where you want to be if you need to be, even bathroom needs. So the combination was brutal. But I'm starting to feel my strength coming back and a new vision for either him being healed or him going home with the Lord or whatever. This is our new normal. So I just have to pick out the good things, wake up, and really focus on what I'm blessed with and thankful for. It helps me. Do I do it every day? 100% no. I don't do it every day, but when I do it, it just changes things.
Tammy leans on her church family. Their faith played a central role through the years. 10 years ago, Damon and Tammy met with the shooter, Texera, and prayed for him.
We got in a circle, which they never let you do, in a circle with the family and him. We held hands, and we prayed over his life, and it was miraculous. Even the people there were in tears. It was just like, wow, you don't get the opportunity to do that after that many years of our life changing, but yes, his life had changed too. So we just wanted to fill him with hope. And then you still have choices, of what you're going to do with your life and your hurts.
This is not the life Tammy and Damon imagined 39 years ago when they married, but it is their reality, and Tammy says they work daily to find peace.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. I said back then, I have no bitterness now. I don't know if I ever will, and thank God. I mean, I'm not dead yet, so there might be an angry period of grief or something, but that doesn't change a thing, And like I said back then, he was a sick boy. I want him to be healthy, him to not have, I think he has a child or two, whatever, not to that unhealthy generation, you want to just have health in the next generation, So no, we definitely don't. I can't speak for you. Are you all good? You all good with what happened and Nick and the people involved?
Pretty subtle, but he was nodding his head yes there. Here's my opinion on all this. The Damon Coates story is one of the most uplifting and at the same time one of the saddest stories I've covered in all my years here. The family's faith and strength is remarkable, but their pain is enormous as well. And still, they go on with good days and bad days just like the rest of us. I'm glad that Nick Texera is able to get on with his life. Hopefully his 20 years getting psychiatric care created a healthy new pathway for his future. And I hope he's able to lead a productive and fulfilling life. And I realize I'm only highlighting one awful example of what happens when mental illness and drugs lead to violence. And there are many, many more examples, maybe in your community, maybe in your family. When we look around at our cities and neighborhoods tonight, though, do any of us really think that things are significantly better than 20 years ago when it comes to getting treatment for mental illness? Is it any easier for that 15-year-old's mom to get them the help they need? You would hope that the answer is yes, and in some areas, there are things getting better. But there is still nowhere near the number of doctors, nurses, psychologists, beds, etc. that we need to treat teens or adults with mental health problems. Here's just one example of that. There are not enough in-network mental health care providers covered by insurance. They're not in-network because the pay is too low. A research report by the Milliman Company put out in 2019 found the percentage of people in Oregon having to go outside their insurance network for behavioral health grew from 13% in 2013 to 19% in 2017. A similar comparison for medical care found a drop from 3% in 2013 to 1% in 2017. So it got better on the medical side. Nobody wants to use an out-of-network provider if they can avoid it. It's more expensive. But people do because they're not nearly enough in-network. The same thing is true for people using outpatient facilities for behavioral health. 29% went outside their insurance network in 2013, 33% went outside the network in 2017. Again, on the medical side, the number going outside the network dropped from 6% in 2013 to 4% in 2017. You see what the numbers are telling us? Things are getting worse when it comes to getting access to help for mental health with your insurance company. And it goes farther than that. Here's part of an email I got from Chris Boniff. He's the executive director of the Oregon chapter of the National Alliance of Mental Illness. He wrote, "There really hasn't been much of a change between now and 2003. In the publicly funded system, we've lost capacity. On the commercial insurance side, we have an extreme shortage of providers. Combined, it's just as hard now as it was in 2003, if not harder, to find a quality provider who is onboarding new patients in a timely manner, if at all." Oregon's new governor, Tina Kotek, has said that she'll make mental health issues a priority in Oregon. My message to her and the legislature: keep that focus and hurry. You've seen the decades-long agony endured by Damon Coates and his family. It is beyond time to get systems and funding in place to keep something like that from ever happening again. Well, that's my opinion. What's yours? Feel free to write in and let me know. Doesn't matter if you're watching this live or later on another platform. We want to hear from you. Our email address, there on your screen, it's thestory@kgw.com, or call and leave a voicemail, 503-226-5090. I look forward to hearing from you.
Still to come on The Story, we're taking a close look at the now demolished Portland Korean church, from the beginnings of worship on that property that stretch way back to the late 1800s to today, with former members of the church sharing their memories.
And then there was like a playroom in the basement. There was an organ. I think we also did some WWF wrestling down there.
Part of Portland for well over a century, the church building may be gone, but tonight we're highlighting its rich history when The Story returns.
I'm still kind of going through the phases of grief, but 3 generations of my family attended this church.
Wow. Our crews were in downtown Portland today hearing from a woman who remembers the Portland Korean Church while it was still hosting worship services. The historic building was destroyed. It used to stand along Southwest Clay and 10th. It had been vacant for years before someone admitted to intentionally starting a fire inside last Tuesday. Demolition crews got to work on Friday to bring the 35-foot steeple crashing down, and with it, more than a century of history. But fire crews were able to miraculously save the former rectory building that sits just feet away from the church itself, and that's where Sunday school was held. There wouldn't be any stories to tell about the former Portland Korean Church if there weren't people who worshiped there and made memories along the way. That's why we thought it was important to highlight their story, to help remember this part of Portland's history. Tae Sun Kim is the Vice President and Chief of Diversity at Legacy Health. And as you heard, her family attended the church for generations. She told us about how the church itself was more than just a place of worship.
The reason why the church was so important was because it was a community within a community. It provided activities and community for senior citizens, after school programs. We had mentors of different ages, especially for those of us that went to schools where there wasn't a lot of diversity. We had bilingual educational opportunities, food and outreach. And so it was more than just a place of worship, but it was in many ways one of the most effective ways in which social integration and engagement was made possible for people who didn't always feel comfortable with their language and their English speaking abilities.
She also talked about what it was like day to day and week to week in the church and rectory building, with several fond times rising to the forefront of her memory this afternoon.
It was amazing. Well, for those of you who are familiar with Korean Presbyterian churches, it's not a 1 hour or 1 day thing. Sometimes you're there 2, 3. Again, if you were one of our elders that lived in Portland, you were there quite regularly for the activities. But it was the one time, usually during the week, when you were just immersed in your heritage culture. Everybody kind of looked like you. The sounds, the smells. It was wonderful. You know, I really have amazing memories of being here. There was a kitchen. Everybody had a role, and they felt so valued and included. This particular Sunday school, I was actually a Sunday school teacher for a few years. I don't know how well I did. I was probably horrible. But yeah, we hung out here. So this was where all of the students, regardless of their age, would come together, and we would have Chondosanim, which is kind of our youth pastor. And then after we had that common time together, then we would split up. So the high schoolers were in the top attic. Then kind of not even middle school, but elementary was right here. And then there was like a playroom in the basement. There was an organ. I think we also did some WWF wrestling down there. It was a lot. It just meant so much to us.
Yes, you can definitely tell. Lovely memories. With the church gone, Kim hopes that some of the items not destroyed by the flames can be saved.
And although this church unfortunately was demolished, I certainly hope that some of the cultural items are saved and preserved. This is one of the only buildings that really captures the history of Korean Americans in Portland. So please save the stuff.
Do any of you have any memories from the Portland Korean Church? Maybe you attended the church or you just drove by it now and then. We'd love to hear your stories as well and share them. You can email us. thestory@kgw.com is our address, or call and leave a voicemail. Our phone number is 503-226-5090. If you're even thinking about changing that channel, not so fast. We are going way back in history into the 1800s for a look at the history of the property where the Portland Korean Church once stood. We've got a trove of old pictures to show you that are incredible to look at. Keep it right here. That's coming up next. A few minutes ago, we talked about what that former Portland Korean church meant to some of its most recent members. Now let's take a look back at the deep history of the people who came to Oregon to form the church that later put up that building. After the building was torched, we were prepared to find all kinds of historical facts, but as it turns out, there's not a ton of information that survived over the years. But our friends at the Oregon Historical Society did help us gather some of the things that they could find, in fact, everything they could find in their collection, and we'd like to thank them for their help, because without them, we wouldn't have enough to bring you a story like this. Anyway, let's get into it. We're going back in time. We'll start here with this directory that was uncovered by the Oregon Historical Society. Now, we don't know the exact year the directory was printed. The date is nowhere on the front or the inside, but our clue comes from the form of the pastor's name, Jacob Stocker. The directory does show that Stocker became the first pastor in 1919, so we know the directory has to be from that year or maybe a little bit later. And we get our first look at the photo of the building on the title page. At this time, it was called the Clay Street Evangelical Church. It went through several name changes that we'll touch on in a minute. But the directory from around a century ago also includes a few pages on the history of the church and the property. And we're going to dive into those details. It's information that you're not going to see or read about anyplace else. This is real history, people. And in our opinion, it's exciting to discover things like this that are often right before our eyes. The church was much more than a bunch of boards and bricks. It was the cornerstone to some very important communities. For this, we're going to go back in time, back to 1875, when a man named Reverend Samuel Henniger came to Oregon to scout missionary opportunities in the state. Remember, back then, Oregon had only been a state for 26 years, so it was certainly a frontier of sorts, not only in terms of timber, but also religion. Henniger was convinced that Portland would be a perfect strategic center for missionary work. In 1876, the Reverend spoke with leaders of the Pacific Conference of the Evangelical Church, saying that he wanted to start up a German mission in Portland. His bosses said, maybe, but definitely not right now. They wanted him to head up an English work in Salem, where he became pastor of Salem Chemeketa Street Church, with the understanding that he would oversee German missionary work in Portland. Well, 2 years later, he got his wish. In 1877, after beginning missionary work among the German population in Portland suburbs, in November of that year, he preached for the first time in the basement of the English Presbyterian Church at 3rd and Washington Streets, doing so in German. And from a basement of the Presbyterian Church, the congregation began to grow. A new German reverend was sent to Portland in the following year. His name was Reverend H.W. Axthelm. That sound German enough for you? I probably butchered it, but it's a good German name. In November of 1878, a charter group of about 13 people was formed to explore the possibility of building a church for the German congregants, you know, to get out of the Presbyterian's basement. Then came June of 1879, when 3 trustees were elected to oversee the construction of the new church in Portland. They bought 2 lots at the corner of 10th and Clay, paying $2,000. According to a few inflation calculators that we checked, that would total around $60,000 in today's numbers. Now, in November of 1879, a reverend by the name of J. Bowersock dedicated the new church, quote, to the service of the triune God, which basically means the idea of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. The cost of the lots, plus construction of the church and a rectory building right next door, brought the cost of the entire project to just over $4,500. In today's terms, that'd be about $140,000. Now, at the time of the dedication, there was still debt, $1,700 to be paid, so they sold one of the 2 lots they originally bought to pay off that debt. The only photo we could find of the old church building comes from an article in the Oregonian from 1990. It was found by researchers at the Oregon State Historical Society. We're focused on the photo on the left. It's a look at the building in the 1880s, so really in the infancy of the church itself. The wooden building could hold around 350 people, and eventually that was not enough. And that brings us to 1905, when a new church and rectory were built for the German congregation. The photo you can see here is an architectural sketch by the man in charge of designing the building, a little-known Portland architect by the name of Henry Dittrich. Let's bring up that photo for you to be able to see it up close. It's gorgeous. It's a grandiose structure described as having a 20th century Gothic style. How about that? Now let's compare the sketch with a photo of what the church actually looked like when it was dedicated in 1905. This picture comes from the Oregonian. Looks about right to me. And by the way, the church directory that we showed you earlier from 1919 or later, well, that valued the church and the rectory at $18,000, which in today's terms would be just north of 300 grand. At the time in 1905, the church was called the First German Evangelical Church, and everything was done in the German language. The name of the church was changed to just First Evangelical around the end of World War I. Maybe it was not that great to have the German in the name after the events of the First World War. And then sometime in the 1920s, the use of the German language, also during worship, was phased out. There were several name changes in the following decades. First Evangelical Reformed Church, First Evangelical United Brethren Church, Clay Street Evangelical Church. The list goes on. But in 1978, the church and its members took their worship to Washington County, where it became known as the Tualatin Valley Community Church. And that's when the Portland Korean Church got its start at the building along Southwest 10th and Clay. One of the first things they did after moving in was remove the original wood siding. They did that in 1980. There's really no record anywhere that we could find as to why they were doing that, but maybe we should just assume that 75 years after it was put on, that old siding needed some TLC. The Korean congregation worshiped there in downtown Portland until they sold the place in 2015, where it sat vacant for years, with plenty of anecdotes arising of squatters taking over inside. The first big problem with the vacant building came in late September of 2020. That's when the first fire tore through parts of the building, and our cameras were there.
And all of a sudden, flames started shooting up from the side back of the church, about as high as halfway up, and the fire trucks responded almost immediately and started putting out the fire. And no one knows what happened or what the cause was.
Today we asked Portland Fire about the cause of that 2020 blaze. The investigator at the time deemed it incendiary, which just means there was a fire set where it should not have been. It could have been arson, also could have been squatters lighting a fire inside to keep warm rather than intentionally trying to burn the building. Either way, nobody was held responsible for that fire. And because of the damage to the church in 2020, the building was deemed unsafe. And it just sat there like that until last week, the first week of 2023, when it was torched and then torn down. Preservationists hope that they can salvage some pieces of the old structure, things like the cornerstone and the weather vane. They'll also be looking for any stained glass that survived demolition, which kind of seems unlikely, but there are theories that the glass is from the famed Povey Brothers art glass studio, a Portland-based company known as the Tiffany of the Northwest. Experts told the Oregonian there's no way to definitively say that the windows were from the Povey Brothers because no documentation exists, and they rarely signed their work. But hopefully, some of the glass survived so that it can be preserved. Keep sending your questions and comments to thestory@kgw.com. We're going to wrap things up right after this. Well, that's the end of our show. Thanks for watching. But remember, the story, our story, well, that never ends. I'll see you tomorrow.